Here I am sitting in a building that I own at a company that I started, surrounded by people that I employ, and I'm afraid to ask a question in a meeting. I was afraid that I was going to ask a question, and the response I'd get back was, dude, you're the CEO of the company. How do you not know that? Or, that's a dumb question. Now, today I would never show up that way. Today I'd show up and go, I would have a ton of questions. And if you look at me and go, that's a stupid question, that's not my issue.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
All right, welcome everybody. Across the camera from me is my co-host, Justin Edwards, CIO of Delta Systems, among many other things. Good morning, Justin.
Hey, good morning.
Also joining us today is our guest, TK Herman, who among his many credits is an entrepreneur, having been president and co-founder of Aptera, and as that evolved, co-founder of Factor AE, which is an architecture and engineering firm management platform, I believe, being used now by over 150 companies across the U.S.
We have about 300, a little over 300 companies right now, yeah.
Fantastic. Growing like crazy. TK is also an accomplished pilot, mentor, and coach, and I believe maybe know more than a little bit about pickleball and trampolines. So we may have to get into that. So TK, thanks for sharing some time with us and welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the invite, for sure. I'm excited to see where the conversation goes.
Absolutely. So let's just kind of jump right in with, I know it's been a while, but how did you get your start in technology?
In the fifth grade, which dates me, this is in the 80s, early 80s, I would sit around when the Apple IIe first came out and I would program. I'd stay in for recess, myself and a couple of kids, and we would play around the Apple IIe. So I've always been kind of attracted to technology and gadgets and so forth. But I got fired my first two jobs, which Steve Jobs has that famous commencement speech that you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect looking backwards. And as I look back, everything that happened in my career happened for a reason. But I quit my last job that I got a paycheck from. I quit. I was, I think, 26 years old. I'm 53 today. And I knew that when I quit my job, that there was no going back. I didn't know what I was going to do long-term wise. I knew I was quitting my job to basically start working for myself. But if that didn't work out, I didn't know what I was going to do, because I knew that once I crossed that threshold of being an employee to being an entrepreneur, that there was no going back. And I'm very fortunate, very blessed to say that I've had some success in my life. I've had some failures also along the way too. And those are certainly big opportunities to learn lessons along the way. But the company you mentioned was Aptera. That was my main business. We started that company in 2003, myself and my business partner. I was the CEO for the duration of the business. And we grew from just the two of us to about 120 people, maybe a little over, when we sold the business in the summer of 2021. And then along the way, mentioning the trampolines, I've always had side gigs. At one point, I had a photography business back in the early days of our software company. I should go back to and also add that Factor, which is the SaaS product you mentioned, that was a product of our sales. So we had been working on and developing this product for a few years. And when the sale opportunity of our consulting business came up, part of the negotiation was, because we were just getting ready to market the product, and the company that bought us didn't care at all about the SaaS product. So part of our negotiation was we got to keep the product and then pick 5 employees to go with us. So we rolled that into a separate company in the summer of 2021. So we started that up like July, early August, officially in the new office. And we've got maybe 12 people today and looking to add a few more, but lots of great growth, lots of opportunity in the industry that we're in for sure. It's fun, I guess, sort of being back in the game, if that makes sense, really from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that plays right into what I was going to ask you next, which is about being an entrepreneur. And you've had that mindset for a long time, it seems, being able to just kind of step away, not sure where you're going to go exactly, but having some idea of a goal in mind. That's very cool. So I'm curious about, you said that the purchasing company or the acquiring company wasn't interested in the application?
Yeah. So what they were really interested in was the consulting business that we had. So Aptera's primary focus was developing web apps, mobile apps, and web development for enterprise level solutions and companies. So we were doing big projects for big companies, really on a global scale. And that's what they were primarily focused on, was that business. We were part of a private equity roll-up strategy. And so there's a whole conversation we can go down. We don't have enough time to get into that. But I've learned more, honestly, more in the last 3-4 years since we sold the business than I did in the previous 20. of entrepreneurship for a variety of reasons. I want a ton. I want to be the low man on the totem pole, right? So if I realized a long time ago, if I find myself in a room where I'm the one that's being asked the most questions, that's a good ego stroke, but that's not how you grow. And so if I find myself in that spot, it's time to find a new room. And so after we sold our business, I got involved in a peer-based business group that has really challenged me in a super positive way, surrounding myself with some extremely successful people. And I think there's two big takeaways that I've taken away from being in this group, and these people are extremely successful, is that number one, it really opened my eyes up to how small I thought. And then as a result of that, how small I played in our business.
For sure. So you say this group in particular kind of opened your eyes to thinking small, or how small that you thought. Give me an example of like what you would consider a small thought that just wasn't going to fly with this group.
For example, I would say combine the experience going through the exit with the private equity firm, and then also so combine that with just some knowledge I've gained from being in this group. The idea of our company having been the platform company for the roll-up strategy, and then me going out and finding investors to help fund that strategy, that wasn't even something I even considered or even thought of. And in hindsight, if I could go back, I would have done exactly that. I think that we could have executed with that playbook probably in actually a much more successful way. And I say that because the company that acquired us, we had 120 people when we sold the business. Then there's maybe 5 people left. And it's honestly sad for me to see, because we'd spent a long time building up just an amazing culture. That was the one thing that really stood out. In fact, when the PE firm came knocking and we were talking with them and they got into their due diligence, they were shocked at how low of turnover we had in our business, then did not offer financial incentives. So we did not have a financial bonus program, but we had extremely low turnover. And they couldn't believe it. Like, how do you do that? And I kept telling them, well, it's not about the money, right? It's about how we treat people. I truly, like, if one of you worked for us, this is how I always operated. I cared more about you as just a human being and doing whatever I can as the employer and the entrepreneur to help you live a happy, love-filled, joyful life, right? And my belief was that if I focused on those areas, or we as a company at the leadership level focused on those areas, that karma would take care of the rest, that you'll work your butt off for us for however long you're with our company. I'm a firm believer that anybody that walks through the door or hops on a Zoom in a company that's an employee, they want to feel wanted, needed, and appreciated. And the more that you can provide that for them, the better your culture is ultimately going to be.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. And we've always run our business with a lot of similar ideas, and we always wanted to make sense for the employees, wanted it to be a groovy place to work. We wanted people to feel appreciated. And it's awesome to hear someone who scaled something to that size, kind of having the same philosophy. That idea of just treating people with respect and trying to advance everybody who works for you is scalable and can lead to success is super cool. So stepping back, like way back to earlier in this conversation, you said you talked about being 26 and moving out of your last gig, you put in your notice or quit your last actual job and then kind of moved into this new company. Like, what moved that into the adjacent possible for you, where you saw this path of entrepreneurship or this way to go down?
I've always been the kind of person that I want to be in charge of my own destiny. And if I'm successful, great. If I fail, I'll take responsibility for it. I would say also early on, when I started working for myself, and then as we started hiring employees, I'm not the smartest guy by any stretch. I'm a B and C student in high school and college. I have a fairly rich development background. I used to write code. I haven't written code in 20 years, but that's not true. I probably wrote code last probably 2005. But I was fairly technical. I did a bunch of work at Microsoft over the years. I would speak at conferences and different things, but I was not a stellar developer by any stretch. My forte and my gift and my zone of genius really probably just more the people skills, the business building, the visionary skill, if you will. So I learned early on that I'd better hire people that are smarter than me or I'm in big trouble. And I was super fortunate I've had business partners in every business that I've been in. And there's a really good book by Gino Wickman called Rocket Fuel that I read many years ago. And in Rocket Fuel, they talk about how in a business, there's a visionary and there's an implementer, or I would call visionary and an operator. And I recognize today, like, I am not an operator. Now I can do those roles, but it's like square peg round hole. So I can do it. It just creates, in my opinion, unnecessary stress for me. I never cognitively or consciously knew this when I started out, but the business partner that I had throughout the life of Aptera, we actually worked together a few years before that in a previous company that I had. He was the operator, and it's like yin and yang. And I look back at Aptera and go, okay, if you had two of me in the business, I know it wouldn't work. And I like to think if we had two of him, that wouldn't work also. It was the combination of the two. Again, I had that in my trampoline business too. My business partner, she was an operator. Even though we were equal partners, she was the operator day to day. And then in the pickleball business, I did not have that. I had a business partner who was not an operator. Again, people are wired in different ways. I'm not an operator. I thought he was going to be. He wasn't. And as a result of that, I was doing a lot of the operator roles, just a lot of behind the scenes stuff you have to do when we have a business. And again, I knew how to do that. I've done it all before, but it was just not fun at all. And again, it caused extra stress that I just didn't want to have at that point in my life.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, it's interesting that yin and yang seems to follow along also in terms of businesses who do have great culture, who people do want to go show up to work for. The great ideas really do get pushed a lot further down the road. Like I said, two idea people necessarily cancel each other out. But so along that line, on Aptera, I think I had read somewhere that there was kind of a light bulb moment where you're getting into the development of the software. It was an internal use sort of a tool, necessity being the mother of invention, what have you. But you or someone had said, wow, we could use something like that.
So the story behind Factor, so that's the company we have today. It's Factor App Inc. is the name of the company. If you go way back, so we actually started developing the software, the basis of what the software is in concept form in 2003. So when we started our consulting business, almost out of the gate, again, this is 2003, there was no cloud, web-based apps really weren't in existence at that point. This was just past the dot-com bubble. So when we started Aptera, just with the two of us, we hired our first person about 3 months in, second person about 6 months in, but we started writing a package, if you will, for us to keep track of our time. Because as we're working on projects, we need to keep track of our time in our projects. And so we started writing this product, and we ended up calling it a scorecard back then. And then my college roommate is an architect. He's actually a landscape architect and owns a firm in Columbus, Ohio. And I just had a random conversation with him maybe 6 months after we started Aptera. And I was telling him, again, just a total random conversation, that we were writing this software to keep track of our time. And he's like, man, I could use something like that. And so we started talking about his business and realized pretty quickly that how you run and operate a custom software development company and manage the projects, and how you manage projects in an architecture, engineering, or landscape architecture firm, it's all the same thing. Different deliverables at the end. There are some different nuanced terminology and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, it was all the same. So we decided we were going to actually market this and bring some clients on board. And again, this is a web-based app. We rented server space from Rackspace, again, because there was no AWS, there was no Azure, there was no cloud services like that. And so we signed on our first client in January of 2004, who is actually still a client today. But this is another good example of me just not having the vision or the foresight to see what we had. Because as we started growing our client base, and I was the sales guy, and I was traveling around convincing people, I was having to convince people it was okay not to have your data stored on a server in your office, right? I came up with all these analogies to help them become comfortable with that concept. And so as we started growing the scorecard and the client base of the scorecard, our consulting business also started growing at the same time. And so we found ourselves circa 2007 or 8 going, okay, we really have our feet on two sides of a net. Right? We've got 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other side. It's custom development, and then it's product. We need to decide. We need to pick a path, because at this point, we're becoming jack of all trades, master of none. And so at that point in time, we decided to pick the consulting business, because that was my background. That was my business partner's background. That's what we knew the best, right? And so we literally did zero development on the product, nothing. I mean, it got to be sort of a sad joke, right, around the office, especially with my business partner and me, because he ultimately became the only person that knew how to even support the product. It had gone that far, right? We did no updates in 10 years. We really let our service and our support go. So if somebody has sent a question in, you might get a reply in a month. It was bad, right? But we were so focused on developing and building out our consulting business, we just sort of left that there to the side. But we had conversations along the way, like, oh, we probably should just get rid of this. We were making money off of it, not a lot. But the problem was we felt bad, because, these companies ran their business on this. Like, if we go away, what are they going to do? And so finally around 2018, we were still using the scorecard, we called it, to manage our software company. And our software company had grown significantly. Now at this point, we're probably over 100 people. We're doing multi-million-dollar projects. It's a whole different ballgame. And so the scorecard was not really doing us a good service. And so we said, we really need to either just get rid of the scorecard personally for our company and then go find some off-the-shelf products, or we could start from scratch, because we always kept our eye on the architecture and engineering world. And there's still a tremendous amount of opportunity, even 10 years later, in that space. And so we said, you know what, we could really go back into it, but now let's start. What if we started from scratch, like total greenfield? Let's start from scratch and rewrite the software from the ground up and using the skill set that we have today. So now at this point in time, I mean, we had business analysts, we had project managers, we had QA people, we had UI UX designers. We had just, I mean, some hardcore, like really top-notch developers working for us. Let's do it that way. So my business partner and I said, okay, let's invest some money in this. So we spent about $3 million of our money putting into the product, developing it over probably a year and a half or 2-year period. We probably didn't actually start it until 2019 or so. And then we were just getting to the point where we were going to start marketing it in early 2021. And that's when the sale opportunity in the consulting business came up. And at that point in time, from a personal perspective, the Factor was actually was more interesting than our consulting business to me, just because our consulting business had grown to the size where we had a leadership team. We had 4 guys that were really making the majority of the decisions, just being confirmed or affirmed with my business partner and me. And the idea of having like more of an entrepreneurial project was very appealing to me. So again, that's part of our deal when when we negotiated the sale of the consulting business, we got to keep the product and pick 5 people to go with us.
I mean, speaking from my own experience as well, and Justin can probably back me up on this too, but it does seem to be a common fork in the road for organizations who are in the development space. I mean, you either are building and or supporting a product or a suite of products, or you are, as you say, kind of a jack of all trades. You're looking to help people solve problems, find solutions, integrate this with that or the other thing. And that either one of those are great business models, but trying to mash them together does become pretty challenging. So I'm just kind of curious, as you're building this up from scorecard, yes, time tracking, but what elements of that for these companies who took it up became like the differentiation? Why did they latch on to this bit of software? Was it at the time because there wasn't anything else that did that, or other things that didn't do it sufficiently?
Back in the scorecard days or Factor currently?
Yeah, well, back in the scorecard days and then building to Factor.
Yeah, I mean, back then, most of the people we talked to did not have a formal package to track anything in their business. I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember when computers came into the workplace. Laptops had black and white screens. We were past that point, but most businesses, as I recall, were running things on Excel spreadsheets, which is amazing because a lot of people still do that today.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, there was really nothing out there. And certainly, I shouldn't say that. There were solutions out there, but they were big monolithic products. Right. Mm-hmm. So like in our space specifically, there's an 800-pound gorilla that's got a huge system, has a ton of customers in it, but also the software is a little older. It's very complicated to use. And our focus has always been on like small to mid-sized firms. And so the expense alone was not going to be something that a small to mid-sized firm would use. So tons of greenfield existed then. It still exists today in a very significant way. But it's interesting, again, going back to being able to connect the dots and look backwards. As I look back on what we had built back then, I mean, I didn't have the vision or the foresight to see what we really had, right? We were at the front end of SaaS products. And again, SaaS wasn't even a word back then. And I look back now like, man, if I had the vision or the foresight, I'd probably be doing this interview from a boat in the Caribbean or something. But at the same time, I mean, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen and lots of lessons learned along the way, for sure.
That's outstanding.
You talked about the sales opportunity coming along. Is that something where you were actively marketing and looking for a buyer, or was it serendipity? I know you talked about it being a PE roll-up project. So yeah, I guess can you speak a little bit to how that came about and kind of what going through the process was like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So again, we'd had the business for 18 years. And my business partner and I had never had a conversation up until about 6 months prior to the sale opportunity coming up. We'd never had a conversation about selling the business at all. And so one day he and I were talking, and I just said, "What's your number? Like, what's the number you'd want to?" Just because I started thinking, like, I was 49 at the time. I'm like, we probably should start thinking about this at some point down the road. Obviously, there needs to be an exit. I mean, I had everything that I had net worth wise was tied up in this business. So we had just had that conversation, and then we were very friendly with a handful of companies over the years, primarily people that I met at conferences, and one of which was a business very similar to us, and they sold their business probably around 2013 or 14. So I remember talking with that owner and CEO, and I'm still friends with him today, talk to him probably a couple times a year. But I remember talking with him about his exit and what he looked for. And then he put me in touch with the M&A guy for the publicly traded company that acquired them. And so I was having conversations with this particular M&A guy for probably 3 years, or every 6 months. I would do a check-in call with him, basically to check in and go, how's the market? Like, what's the market look for? What are you looking for in businesses? Just so that I understood what a buyer would be looking for. And then we could at least tailor things up to make sure that A, are we on the right track? Is this something that would be attractive to people? Or also just looking for insight and seeing, well, we're seeing XYZ in the market. Should we consider pivoting to something? And so it just so happened that one of the other companies that we were very friendly with out of Wisconsin, they were slightly bigger than us. They had announced in February of 21 that they were acquired. And we knew that they were looking to sell. The CEO, they were an ESOP, they were employee owned. And the CEO was, I think he was maybe 60, early 60s. And he was looking to kind of move on. But we didn't realize that they were that close. So they announced and they sold. I'm like, hey, of course we call him like, hey, congratulations. That's awesome. Super happy for you. And then in March, he calls us and said, hey, I know that you're not interested at this stage in the game or right now, but the company that acquired us is looking for one more company to bring into the fold. Would you be interested in the conversation? And my philosophy is always, I'll talk to anybody about anything. And so at that point in time, we had a couple of conversations, and that got the ball sort of spinning in my mind, at least, like, okay, what would this look like? And we knew early on that they weren't interested in Factor. So like, okay, this is kind of interesting. We had a number in mind, and we also knew, like, I knew exactly what the value of our business was, and that wasn't enough for us. But they came up pretty substantially in their offer, and it was enough to the point where it's like, okay, then my business partner and I are kind of talking to one another, like, okay, again, this was early 2021, coming out of COVID, where we're still in the mix of COVID. The country goes into a recession. Hey, we're in this now for 5 to 7 more years for sure, right? And at the time, I was going to be 50 that year. My partner is a couple years older than me. And I'm like, I don't want to do this when I'm 60, right? And so we saw it as a way to take some chips off the table and me not worry about having everything that I had rolled up into one business, and then be able to start kind of fresh with Factor. And so we decided to take the opportunity to do that. And again, tons of lessons learned along the way there. The company actually, we were the last piece of the puzzle. So I knew the private equity firm was looking to flip the whole thing, probably in 12 to 24 months. Well, we closed in the middle of June of 21, and the middle of December of 21, so or 6 months later, they flipped the whole thing to another business. And there's, again, a whole story behind that, which ended up being great because we had some equity in it. So we were able to get a little bit of a second bite to the apple. Most of our deal was cash. And it's so funny too, because going into, like, say, October-ish, there were just some things that were happening in the business that I didn't agree with. And I never did this, but I wanted to call them up and say, just give me my stock back. Give me the money that you gave me in stock. I don't want the stock anymore. And then 6 weeks later, the stock appreciated significantly. And then I'm thinking, I should have taken the whole deal in stock. Right. Those are the kind of thoughts that go through your head. But again, it's been very interesting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think not that many people have gone through M&As, so it's always interesting to hear the details of that. They're always fun to negotiate.
How or when do you make that determination that, okay, we're going to rebuild this from scratch. It's going to become the core part of this company. We're going to get rid of the rest. This is where our focus is going to go now. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of idea evolution and process evolution to make that departure from consulting to supporting the singular product and then exploding this product to be what I know your goal is, which is to be number one software in that category.
It wasn't really like a super hard decision because the other business was acquired, right? So the other business went away. The day we closed the business, or they closed the sale of the business, was literally the last time anybody ever asked me a question about the business, even though I had a contract to stay on board with them for 6 months. And so at that point, it was a pivot shift and said, okay, let's move forward all in on this. I did say to my business partner, though, I'm like, I don't want to be president and CEO anymore. I just want to be an investor. And so he leads the business day to day now and has done an outstanding job of just, again, building the team up, building the product. Our product is rock solid. We are over the top when it comes to customer support and delivering a good experience, because I believe being successful in business really isn't that hard. I mean, obviously it's hard work, it's risk taking, it's stressful, that's true. But to me, being successful in business is about delivering a good experience to two different camps. One is your customers and one is your employees. And if you can focus on delivering just an outstanding experience to those two camps, you have a far better than not chance of being successful. I mean, you're going to be successful in doing so. And so for us, we obviously made that natural pivot because we sold the business. So basically, he and I put $1 million in right out of the gate and said, okay, let's put $1 million in and we'll fund this and we'll see how it goes. And if it seems like it's going to get some traction and some legs underneath it, then we'll go out and raise some money. And so we put the $1 million in. Things started going. At that point in time, again, we had the other product called Scorecard, but we lost customers over the 10 years we did nothing. So we were down to probably 7 companies that were still using it, which is amazing because they had all been ported over by this time to Factor. But it's pretty amazing that we've had people working with us on basically the same type of software since 2003. And even today, we have extremely low turnover, and our customers are very low churn for us, like lower than what's average or even good in the industry, because we take such good care of our clients and our product is solid. So we put the $1 million in and then decided we were going to raise some money through friends and family. So we raised a little over like $2.5 million, a little more than that, just through some friends and family around. And we've grown to where we're at this point in time. Again, we about 300, a little over 300 firms and over 3,000 users using the product right now. And so we're at this pivot point now where it's like, okay, well, we could keep growing the way we're growing now, or we could go out and raise some real money. We understand our sales process. We understand the marketing side. We know all these things. We understand how to take care of the customers. We understand the product development. We understand all of this. And now it's time to really, let's go out and these are the conversations we're having now. Let's go out and really raise some real money and really throw some fuel on the fire. So we're excited about this next stage of the growth for us. And I really think it's going to take us from, again, a little over 300 customers to our goals, 2,000 or 3,000 customers here in the next 3 years.
So for folks who are working on that scaling piece, and you're talking about pulling in some capital and deploying it, is that primarily towards sales and marketing efforts because you know your numbers and you just have a system with an ROI that you need to scale, or is that a product or a mix?
It's a mix of all the above, yeah. Because right now we are very small in terms of headcount. And so people are wearing a lot of different hats. And we've been able to grow this far to this point with the team that we have. But to get to the next level, we've got a whole plan in place for how we would spend, even if we were anywhere from $5 to $15 million, whatever we end up deciding we're going to raise. We have a plan in place and how we're going to grow that and what that looks like over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of headcount. So it's the mix for sure, a big piece of sales and marketing and support. But then obviously there's a development component to it as well, because we're constantly not only maintaining things within the system, but also looking at what features we can add to improve our user experience.
Sorry, just real quick, because I'm a nerd. What is your tech stack, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so primarily .NET based. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
At our consulting business, we were a Microsoft shop.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask me much deeper than that, I'm going to say I don't know the answer because I've hired people a lot smarter than me.
We heard last line of code, 2005. I'm not going to hold you to it.
I know obviously there's React on the front end, but I couldn't give you the litany of all the different things we use behind the scenes.
But yeah, probably .NET MVC. So that makes sense. A super modern, well-supported tech stack. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to ask just in terms of on the development side, since we're now landing on it. Thank you, Justin. I'm assuming that there is, of course, a roadmap that you're wanting to follow. Is that roadmap driven by what you yourself or the company kind of internally are seeing as trends in the marketplace, places you want to go? Or is that primarily driven by your user base? We'll just call it the super low tech of, hey, I'd like to see this feature. What's the likelihood of getting it sort of approach?
That's a good question. I would say it's probably a mixture of both. Clearly, our users, and again, in full transparency, I don't work in the business day to day. I sit sort of between a day-to-day employee that's getting a paycheck from the company and a board member, right? So my business partner runs the business day to day. So he's way more involved in these decisions, and the decisions ultimately land on him. But I do know that we're constantly looking at two sides. One is what kind of feedback are we getting from our customers and what are they asking for? We're also careful not to, if somebody says, I need this, that we hurry up and go over and tweak this over here. Because we did that before in the original version of the product called Scorecard way back in the day. Again, we were so green and new to this that anytime somebody said, I need this feature, we would go off and we would do it. and not realizing that that creates a challenge, right? In the long run, just from a maintenance perspective. And then also that idea of adding features when customers ask for them is a balance between, is this a feature that's really necessary in the business? And is it useful for other companies as well? Right. So if we're going to do it, is it something that other companies would want to need and find useful? Or the opposite could be, is it more changing a business process on the company's back end? Right. Because there are many times when companies come to us and say, I've got to have a feature XYZ. And we're like, well, why is that? And then you start asking questions and then start to realize that it's not about the feature, it's about how they're running their business. And then we're able to come in with really a level of expertise that's unique because we work with so many companies and go, here, basically, in quotes, here's why you don't need this. Here's a better way to do it, right? So I would say, to answer your question again, it's a combination of us listening to our customers, hearing what they're saying and what they're wanting, making those decisions, and then also looking at the industry and the trends and the technologies that are coming down the pipe and so forth, and really making the determination, okay, well, what features do we feel like we could add that might be of value as well?
I think looking at your customers and asking them why 3 or 4 times to figure out what they actually need versus what they're asking for is the most consulting thing you could possibly have said, because that's so much of what we do as consultants, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you too, that us having a deep background and our business having deep roots in the consulting business, those are easy things for us to really think through, because as you guys know, when you do custom development work, I mean, everyone's asking for the world and you can deliver that to them, but you really want to get to the root of why they're asking for that. Because more often than not, there's a whole bunch of spiderweb answers as to why they're asking for that might not even require technology to solve.
Yeah, some of our favorite customers are people we've never done business with because they had a big expensive software project and we said, why don't you just use this? And they said, thanks so much. Talk to you later.
Looking ahead a little bit, next 5 to 10 years, and the things that you have learned in your past 5 to 10 years, what kind of advice, so just thinking in terms of putting yourself on the other side of the table, what kind of advice would you have, just some bullets for someone that's kind of maybe early in their journey, when they're trying to find a mentor, they're trying to find their way, they're trying to find their place in the space of a SaaS system or a consultancy? What would you tell them now?
I'll give you 3 things that come to my mind. First and foremost, I think the 3 keys to building a business are, number 1, find and hire the most passionate, loyal, dedicated, smart people you can possibly find. And even if you just find one of those, then start leveraging, well, who do you know? Who do you know? Who do you know? Because smart, motivated, talented people tend to hang around with smart, motivated, talented people. So find the absolute best of the best people that you can find and bring them into the fold. Number 2 in this process is point them in the direction that you want them to go, right? And the more rifle approach versus shotgun you can get, the better, right? So the more focused you can get, the better. So point them in the direction you're going to go. But the linchpin, because none of this is rocket science, right? And those first 2 things, people are like, yeah, I get that. But where I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle is the 3rd piece is get out of their way, right? That's the key. Because as an entrepreneur, you have, and it's your business, right? You have this feeling that it's got to be this way, we're going to go down this path. And if you don't understand kind of where your zone of genius is, right, and then allow people to fill in those gaps, you're always going to struggle again. So it's hire the absolute best of the best people, point to the direction you want to go, and then get out of the way. The second takeaway would be, there's a phrase that I use all the time, is don't let perfect ruin good.
I love that.
I didn't come up with the phrase at all, but I can give you an example after example of that in my entrepreneurial career, where we were sitting in a meeting one day. There's a group of people in the meeting, and we're talking about doing something. And I remember sitting in the meeting, and in my head, I'm thinking, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But I wasn't going to say that out loud. I know way I'm saying that out loud, but I thought that. And then I sat there and I thought, okay, well, I can say something and they will course correct or redirect on this idea if I say something. But I was sort of doing the mental calculation that if it is not successful, what's the impact in the business? And the impact was virtually 0, right? And so it's like, okay, well, let's try this, because it was going to be something we could try and sort of identify did it work or not very quickly. Let's try it and see, because I could be wrong. I don't have all the answers. Like, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? And so they tried it and it didn't work. It was a disaster. And then we had like a post-mortem afterwards around it, and listening to the people talk about what they learned in the process was so infinitely more valuable than me chiming in and changing that direction from the get-go. So again, I would just listen to a video recently. I can't remember who it was. A very successful entrepreneur was talking about how you should be the last person, like as the owner of the business, you should be the last person in the meeting to give your opinion. And you should start with the most junior person, right? Because even if you, like I tried to create an environment where I'm like, hey, give me feedback. I like take the gloves off. You could punch me in the face. I'm here for that. But I also know you'll never get honest feedback, like truly raw, honest feedback, because you signed the paychecks. It's your business, right? So I know that, even to the point where we had one person at one point in time that was our HR manager a long time ago. And he was somebody that I would have like deep conversations, and he would really give me honest, raw feedback. And so he was my go-to person, because I would say, okay, well, tell me what people are saying or what they're thinking, because he would give it to me. But I always knew that even he would have some measure of toning things down a bit, right? Even though I asked him not to. So that was definitely an observation that I made over the years. So again, I invite people, point them in the direction, get out of the way. 2 is don't let perfect ruin good. And I think the third piece, and I believe the absolute most important piece, is as the entrepreneur, as the founder of the business, as the CEO, if you want to grow your business, you need to look in the mirror and really dig into your own head trash that flows around in your mind. Because we all have stories. My stories are, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm lazy. I'm an imposter, right? And I've done the work over the last 10 plus years to really draw lines and understand where those stories came from. And I also understand very clearly how whatever your stories are, everyone's are different. Whatever your stories are, your subconscious will go find evidence to support those beliefs that you have in your head, right? And so you need to get to an understanding that they're just stories that live in your head, because I firmly believe that a company will never outperform the internal subconscious self-image of the CEO. So the more work that you're willing to do on yourself, the greater opportunity you have to grow the business to levels that you didn't expect were possible. So as I'm doing this course, and sort of in the middle of it, I was sitting in a meeting at our company one day in our conference room. There's probably 10 people in the meeting. And I sat down at the head of the conference room table just because I sat there for no particular reason. I wasn't like leading the meeting. And I'm sitting there, I'm listening to this conversation going on around me, but I'm paying attention to the thoughts that are in my head at the same time. So I'm very cognizant of what's going on in my head. And I found myself wanting to ask questions, but I wasn't asking the questions. And I realized the reason I wasn't asking the questions was I was afraid. I was afraid that I was going to ask a question, and the response I'd get back was, dude, you're the CEO of the company. How do you not know that? Or that's a dumb question, or I can't believe you don't know that, right? But I didn't know. Like, again, I don't know everything. I didn't know. Here's the insanity of these stories that live in our head and how they drive the bus. Here I am sitting in a building that I own, at a company that I started, surrounded by people that I employ, and I'm afraid to ask a question in a meeting. Now, today I would never show up that way. Today I'd show up and go, I would have a ton of questions. And if you look at me and go, that's a stupid question, that's not my issue, right? It's so interesting how things like that, you don't even realize how those kind of things hold you back.
TK, it has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Really appreciate all the insights and just kind of showing up for us today and talking through all this different stuff. It's been fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate you guys inviting me on.
You bet. So where and how can people connect with you if they need to?
I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is just TK Herman, no periods, just TK Herman.
All right. Well, everybody, that wraps us up for today. Thank you, as always, to my partner in crime here, Justin. And also special thanks to our guest, TK Herman. Really appreciate the insights, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, TK. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great talking to you guys.
Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.